The Social Security Trust Fund will reach insolvency by the trustees' own published projection, sometime between 2033 and 2035. When that happens, benefits are automatically reduced to approximately 77% of current levels. Not zero, not gone, but cut, automatically. Without any vote, any announcement, any warning. That's not a political statement. That's the Social Security Administration's own 2023 Trustees Report. Now here's the question I want you to sit with for a moment. How much of your retirement income, the income you will actually live on in your 70s and 80s, depends on decisions made by institutions you do not control? Take out the same piece of paper from the previous exercises. Write down every income stream you're planning to rely on. Social Security, you don't control it. Pensions, if you have one. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that only 12% of private sector workers today have defined benefit pension plans, down from 38% in 1980. If you have a pension, put a question mark next to it. Annuities from institutions, question mark. Any income that flows from a decision made by someone other than you, question mark. Now count the question marks. For most people watching this, the majority of their retirement income is sitting behind a question mark. Jewish communities solved this problem 2,000 years before governments invented pensions. They built a retirement system, a functioning, practical system that produced peace in old age without depending on any government, any institution, or any single family's resources. And it worked across centuries of political instability, economic collapse, and cultural upheaval. That system has 3 pillars. By the end of this video, you'll have all 3. And at around minute 12, I'll give you the specific role definition that is the psychological core of why it worked, and why most Western retirement planning misses it entirely. Let me tell you what retirement anxiety is actually made of. In 2021, a study in the Journal of Gerontology examined retirement satisfaction across 18 countries. The researchers controlled for income, for health, for family structure. They wanted to know what the strongest predictor of subjective retirement peace actually was. It was not portfolio size. It was not pension generosity. It was not even health status. It was what the researchers called perceived community embeddedness. The feeling, not the fact, the feeling of belonging to a community that would support you if you needed it. That your life was embedded in something larger than your individual financial position. Jewish communities ranked in the top 3% of all cultural groups studied on this measure. Not the top 3% of wealthy communities, the top 3% overall. Here's the hidden mechanism that produces retirement anxiety regardless of how much money you have. Most modern retirement planning is designed around a single individual and their accumulated assets. The assumption is, if you accumulate enough, you are safe. But the nervous system doesn't work that way. The nervous system doesn't respond to balance sheet security. It responds to relational security, to the felt sense that if things went wrong, you would not face them alone. A person with $2 million in a brokerage account but no community, no embedded relationships, no sense of being known and valued in a network. That person's nervous system generates anxiety despite the 2 million. Because the 2 million is a number on a screen. It is not a village. And we are not evolved to trust numbers on screens. At minute 3, here's the loop I want to open, and we'll close it at 11. Pirke Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, one of the most studied texts in Jewish tradition, describes the stages of a human life in detail. It includes a stage called wisdom, a stage called counsel, and a stage called old age. What it does not include, what is entirely absent from this 2,000-year-old framework, is retirement in the Western sense of the word. Hold that absence. It tells you everything about why the system worked. Here's the exercise for this moment. Write down the income streams from your list earlier. Now for each one, add a second question alongside the S, C, and G labels from the previous video. Ask, if this income stream disappeared entirely tomorrow, what is the community infrastructure I could rely on? Not family, not savings, community. Other people, outside your immediate family, who would have a practical role in supporting you. For most people doing this exercise, the answer is nothing. Or, I haven't thought about it. That blank space, the absence of community infrastructure in most modern retirement plans, is not a coincidence. It is the design failure of the individual asset model that has dominated Western financial planning for 60 years. The immediate insight: retirement security is not a number. It is an architecture. And architecture has 3 pillars, not 1. In traditional Jewish communities from the Talmudic period through the 19th century, the kehilla, the communal organization, functioned as a mandatory mutual insurance fund. Every earning member of the community contributed a portion of their income to a communal fund called the kupa. The contributions were not optional. The distributions to those who could no longer work were not charity. They were a return on prior contribution, a community-managed pension that predated the first government pension by more than 1,000 years. The historian Jacob Katz, in his landmark 1961 work, Tradition and Crisis, documents the kehilla's financial structure across European Jewish communities from the 13th through 18th centuries. What he found is this: the system worked not because it was financially sophisticated, but because it was structurally compulsory. Everyone contributed during productive years. Everyone received support during non-productive ones. No individual needed to hold enough assets to self-fund their entire old age. The community held that risk collectively. Here's loop 3, the question I'm opening at minute 6 and closing at 13. The kehilla system required something that most modern individuals are not accustomed to offering: a mandatory contribution to others during your productive years, with the expectation of reciprocal support later. The question is, what is the modern equivalent of the kehilla? Not the theory, the practical architecture you can build right now with the people in your actual life. Hold that. Here is level 1 of the 3-pillar system. The first thing you can do this week: map your retirement income sources into 3 columns. Self-generated. You built it. It runs without ongoing decisions. It depends on no one else's choice. Community-based. It depends on relationships, on being part of something, on reciprocal arrangement. Government or institution dependent. Someone else controls whether it continues. Calculate the percentage of your planned retirement income in each column. Then ask, if my government-dependent column dropped to 77% of its current value, which the SSA trustees say is possible, what happens to my lifestyle? Can I absorb it? Or does it require a change in plan? That number is not meant to alarm you. It is meant to give you a clear picture of the work that remains. Most people doing this calculation find that they are far more exposed to institutional risk than they thought. And that visibility is the first pillar. Now let me tell you about the second pillar. And this is the pattern interrupt. The story that will reframe what retirement actually is. I want you to think about someone you knew, a grandparent, an elder in your community, who seemed genuinely peaceful in their later years. Not in denial about their age, not pretending things were fine, genuinely settled, not anxious about the future. If you can picture someone like that, here's what I'd be willing to bet was true about them. They had a role. They weren't just receiving the generosity of family and community. They were contributing something, teaching, advising, being consulted, adjudicating, witnessing. The second pillar of the Jewish retirement architecture is what I call the productive elder role. It is grounded in the Pirke Avot framework I mentioned at minute 3, the one that has no Western retirement concept in it. Because in the traditional Jewish conception of the life cycle, old age is not the cessation of contribution, it is the transformation of its form. At 60, the contribution is physical effort and active commercial judgment. At 70 and 80, the contribution is wisdom, accumulated experience, and the willingness to be consulted. At 90, in the Pirke Avot framework, the contribution is simply presence. the visible evidence that a full life is possible. A 2020 study in the Gerontologist found that elders with active non-monetary contribution roles showed 31% lower rates of financial crisis requests from family members. Not because they were wealthier, because people who see themselves as contributors do not position themselves as burdens. Here is level 2 of the system. Define your elder contribution role. Not vaguely, specifically. Write down, in the next 10 years, what will you teach? What domain of accumulated knowledge or experience will you make available to others? To whom specifically? This is not a retirement hobby. This is the second structural pillar of your retirement security. Because an elder with a defined contribution role maintains a position of exchange within their community, and exchange, unlike dependency, is self-sustaining. At minute 3, I pointed to the absence of retirement, in the Western sense, from Pirke Avot's description of the human life cycle. Here's what that absence means. The tradition didn't forget to include retirement. It rejected the concept. Not because it was indifferent to the needs of old age. The tradition is enormously attentive to those needs, but because it recognized that the psychological and financial vulnerability of old age is dramatically worsened by role removal. When you stop contributing, you stop being a participant. When you stop being a participant, you become a beneficiary. And beneficiaries are fragile in ways that participants are not. The 2,000-year experiment of Jewish communal life produced one clear finding. The most secure elders are those who remain contributors, not through denial of their age or their limitations, but through the conscious design of a contribution role that matches their actual capacity. The contribution role is not a luxury. It is the second load-bearing pillar of the architecture. Here is level 3, the complete 3-pillar structure. Pillar 1, self-generated income architecture. Reduce your G column as much as structurally possible. Build income streams that depend on your decisions, not institutional ones. The Talmudic third rule from the first video governs this. 1/3 liquid, 1/3 productive, 1/3 as store of value. Your productive column is your S column income foundation. Pillar 2, your defined elder contribution role. This is written down. It is specific. It names the domain, the audience, and the form of contribution. Not theoretical, scheduled. Something you are already doing or will begin doing in the next 90 days. Pillar 3, community infrastructure investment. Here is the answer to the Loop 3 question I opened at minute 6, the modern equivalent of the kehilla. It is not one thing. It is a portfolio of community relationships that are explicitly reciprocal. Not transactional, reciprocal. The distinction is this: a transaction ends when the exchange is complete. A reciprocal relationship continues because both parties are permanently invested in each other's well-being. Building 3 to 5 explicitly reciprocal relationships in your professional network, your neighborhood, your religious or civic community is the third pillar. And it is the one that functions when every other pillar is under stress. Now close the loop from minute 6. What is the modern kehilla? It is intentional reciprocity. It is the deliberate building of relationships where you contribute during your years of capacity and can legitimately expect practical support in your years of need. Not charity, exchange. Built now, documented, informally but explicitly. Maintained through consistent contribution. 1 year from now, if you've reduced your G column, defined your elder contribution role, and built 3 reciprocal community relationships intentionally, here is what will be different. The Social Security debate will be background noise to you. Not because you've solved the political problem, you haven't, but because you've built an architecture that functions whether or not the institutional column delivers exactly what it promised. The anxiety about things outside your control diminishes precisely to the degree that your architecture inside your control is complete. At the beginning, I asked how much of your retirement income depends on decisions made by institutions you don't control. Now I want you to ask a different question. How much of your retirement security depends on the architecture you've built? the one that belongs entirely to you, that no government policy can cut and no institutional failure can threaten. The three-pillar system, self-generated income, a defined elder contribution role, and intentional community reciprocity, is the architecture Jewish communities used for 2,000 years before the first pension was ever written. It worked through Roman occupation, through medieval exile, through the collapse of every government that claimed to protect the communities it eventually expelled. It worked because it was designed to work without anyone's permission. This is what the whole series has been building toward. Not more assets, not better advisors. A complete architecture. One that you control. One that is designed to function across every scenario you can imagine. If you've watched all 5 videos in this series, you now have every piece of that architecture. What you do with it in the next 30 days is the only question that remains.